Have you ever noticed how leaders, politicians, revolutionaries, even religious figures, all seem to be reading from the same script? It's like there's this timeless playbook they all use. Well, today, we're going to peek inside that playbook and look at the actual neuroscience that makes it so incredibly powerful. Let's break it down.
So yeah, that's the big question, right? Why do they all tell the same basic stories? When you really stop and think about it, it's kind of weird. Across all of history, across totally different cultures, the promises used to win people over are shockingly consistent. And believe me, it is not a coincidence. It's a strategy that plugs directly into the core wiring of our brains. Okay, first up, the promise of abundance. Leaders tap right into our most basic primal survival instincts. They promise food, prosperity, a future where you don't have to worry about the basics. It's the most fundamental promise of security. And it works because it calms down our deepest anxieties.
Then you get the absolutely electrifying promise of freedom. This is the call to break the chains, right? To stand up and reclaim your dignity. It's such a powerful motivator because it speaks to that deep need we all have for control over our own lives and our own destiny.
Next up, the deep-seated promise of justice. This is the idea that the scales will finally be balanced, that fairness will win out, that the bad guys will get what's coming to them. It's an appeal to our incredibly strong, innate sense of what's right and what's wrong.
And finally, there's that comforting promise of security. This is the pledge to protect us from threats, whether they're from the outside or from within. It offers us a feeling of safety and stability in what can often feel like a pretty chaotic world. So, you've got food, freedom, justice, and security. But to really get why these four symbols are so potent, we need to go deeper. We need to go inside the human brain. And it turns out, hope, well, it works using the very same machinery that our brains use for dreaming.
Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating. Your brain uses the exact same hardware for both dreaming and hoping. The only real difference, dreaming is your brain sorting through unresolved stuff from the past while you're asleep. Hope is your brain simulating solutions for the future while you're awake. It's like a waking dream.
And this all happens in a network of brain regions that are basically our internal scenario generators. What they do is they grab bits and pieces of memories, emotions, and experiences, and then they mash them all together to create these little movies of what could be. It's literally our brains storyboarding the future.
So what's the fuel for this whole simulation engine? Well, there's a term for it: residual strain. That's just a fancy way of saying all the unresolved junk buzzing around in your head. You know, the unfinished goals, the arguments, the worries. That strain is the energy source that powers your dreams at night and your hopes during the day.
But here's the thing. This whole internal process, it doesn't just stay locked inside one person's head. Oh no. This is where it scales up, and this is where it becomes a social force so powerful it can actually shape the world.
Think about it. When millions of people are all feeling the same kind of residual strain, like, say, economic hardship or a feeling of injustice, their individual hopes can actually start to sync up. They begin to vibrate at the same frequency. And this creates what you could call a collective emotional field, a tangible force of shared hope that can change history. And this synchronization, it isn't magic. It's actually driven by some very specific tools. Things like powerful political speeches that frame our problems in a certain way, media stories that repeat a narrative over and over, and cultural rituals that make us all feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Which brings us right back to where we started. If you have these massive collective emotional fields all driven by a shared strain, well, how do you manage them? Those four symbols, food, freedom, justice, and security, they are the control panel. They're society's emotional regulators.
Each symbol is like a precision tool targeted at a very specific type of collective strain. Is the population worried about just surviving? A leader will use symbols of food and abundance. Are people feeling oppressed and controlled? They'll deploy the promise of freedom. A widespread sense of unfairness? The whole story shifts to justice. It's incredibly precise.
But, and this is a really crucial point, not all of these symbols are created equal. Promising someone bread is powerful, sure, but promising them freedom, that operates on a whole other level. It activates multiple layers of who we are all at once: our identity, our moral compass, and that scenario generator in our brain that imagines a different future. That's what makes it such an unbelievably effective tool for mobilization.
But this whole process, it's not a one-and-done deal. It's a dynamic, repeating cycle. You can almost think of it as the unstable heartbeat of a society, constantly moving between tension and release.
And the cycle pretty much always looks like this. First, it starts with a widespread collective strain. Then, a leader or a movement comes along and offers a symbolic promise that speaks directly to that strain. This generates a massive amount of collective hope. But then comes the really hard part, the waiting period, where an entire society just holds its breath to see if the promise will actually be kept. And finally, you get the outcome. And that outcome, it can only really go one of two ways. If the promise is fulfilled, that collective strain gets released and the system stabilizes. But if it's broken, all that hope curdles into collective disappointment, and that can become a profoundly destabilizing force.
And that's why this isn't just some abstract theory. The cycle of hope and disappointment is one of the primary engines of history. When those huge symbolic promises get broken, the emotional energy that's been built up can lead to unrest, to reform, or even to full-blown revolution. The stakes really couldn't be any higher.
So, all of this leaves us with a final thought. Now that you have this framework, just look around you. Think about the strains and the tensions in our world today. And ask yourself, what symbolic promise is your society waiting for right now?